The Outsider podcast shares the opinions and analyses of Drew Landry. They are his thoughts and his thoughts alone, and do not necessarily reflect every member of his audience or newsletter readers. Now, on with the show.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Outsider Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Drew Landry. And folks, thank you so much for making this the best politics podcast west of I-35 in the Lone Star State. So, however, whenever, and wherever you are listening and or watching, please know that I'm incredibly grateful for your attention. In today's episode, I have a return to an oldie, but I'm glad it's coming back. It's the Trot around the bases. And then I get into the main topic, which is religion's place in politics. But first, let's get right down to first base with an interesting story here in Lubbock County. Now, for those of you who may be listening in other places, this is kind of super local here, but it also made some news and it's worthy of attention. Lubbock County, he's a jerk. Let's just call it what it is. Of a county commissioner, all right? And he's also a two-time failed congressional candidate. His name's Jason Corley. He made news with an empty Fireball bottle, all right? The cinnamon whiskey cheapskate style of alcohol known as Fireball. So here's what happened. He and a handful of other Republicans, it's just a handful, wasn't that many, knocked on some doors last weekend, and they were doing this for the corrupt Senate candidate of Ken Paxton. It was for their guy. But Corley rang a doorbell, then pulled out an empty bottle of Fireball whiskey, then put it in the homeowner's planter. Look, I've knocked on a lot of doors in my time, but I've never done it drunk. So, and that's been a lot of the speculation is that he was drinking doing this. Now Corley, his story is way different than that. He says that he picked up someone's trash that was in that person's yard, and then he left it in the planter because he didn't know where else to really put it. And so, according to the online publication known as Lubbock Lights, reading from that piece, it reads here: the video showed Jason Corley taking an empty bottle of Fireball out of his back pocket and leaving it in a planter next to someone's front door. Corley said, walking up to this door, and there's a bottle of Fireball laying in this guy's yard. No big deal. Pick it up. It's just trash. Then I'm like, I don't want to be block walking with a bottle of Fireball in my pocket, Corley said, so he set it down in the planter. It was trash laying on the ground. It's a nice neighborhood. I don't know. It's what you do. Anyway, I go on. I don't think much of it. Well, he said, I don't think anything of it. My bad. Well, people commenting online thought he was drinking. Not going to lie, I'm one of those who buy into that. But Corley says that's not the case. And then he later gets messages from this throughout the day. The Democratic candidate for Congress, Kyle Rabel, out here said that he made fun of him. He says, "Well, if those were my candidates, I'd be drinking too." And but Corley is pretty adamant that it's not a big deal, whatever. And I wasn't drinking. And then he goes on to say, "Here's well, your local libs have got no issues." That's what he said. Have got no issues. Your local libs have got no issues. Local libs have got no issues. Have got no issues. They've got nothing to talk about. So this is the best they do. Well, thanks for the free publicity, Corley said. Yeah. Now, I'm not that sophisticated enough to give you like extra video of this. If I can, I'll see if I can't link it somewhere so you can look at how he walks up from the sidewalk, and from this homeowner's ring picture, well, ring camera, and it nowhere does it show him picking up anything. So maybe he found it in another person's yard. Maybe he had to have found it when he wasn't being recorded. It's the only logical explanation, other than what he was doing, which was probably drinking. And then once he's done, he littered it in someone's yard. No one believes this whole thing about how he picked up trash. Yeah, no one believes that. And look, I can't blame him. I mean, if I had to go to bat for Paxton, I'd need to be liquored up too. But I guess my biggest thing is Fireball. Really? That's what you go for? Fireball? Cinnamon with Fireball? I really shouldn't make fun of him. I mean, the guy needs help. I mean, he lost another congressional race. He has a bad haircut for one, for two, I guess. He's leaving the county commissioner's court in January. No one in the county courthouse likes him, and really, no one likes him. And that's really the sad story of it. I mean, if there ever was a living example of a slapnut, it'd be him. But there is help for you, Commissioner Corley, and look, the county hopes that you get it before you embarrass itself, yourself, and your family again. Second base, we round first and head on to second, is that there's new polling out for some Texas races that were released this past week, and it holds some mixed results. State Representative out of the Austin area and Democratic nominee for Senate, James Talarico, leads Attorney General Kim Paxton by about 3 points. It's about what it is, give or take. And where the Republicans are pretty much winning every other race, governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, controller, land commissioner, railroad commissioner, winning these particular, they're out in front. They're running ahead of the Democrats. And you say, well, how can they be winning in those but losing at the top? Well, there's a lot of reasons for it. I like to point to the presidency and the fact that Kim Paxton is a lazy, arrogant candidate. I mean, if the Republicans ever nominated a worse candidate, I don't know who it would be. But they wanted a close race. They wanted to show everybody that even with their worst possible candidate, Texas will still vote for a Republican. This is the opportunity Texas has not to do that. And the other thing we have to remember is that the president's popularity is the lowest it's ever been. And that's going to hurt the Republicans from Senate races all the way down to state house races, if not even farther down. So, and the only way he's really going to stave this sort of election onslaught, the only way the president is going to be able to really survive this is if he cheats. I mean, that's just what it is. I mean, if you actually have a fair fight here, there's no way Republicans are going to do anything in this election. Just no way. But the president got states to gerrymander. They got all these states did a little Trump-mander. That's probably not. That's going to come back and bite him in the butt. I mean, we're seeing that in Florida. We're going to see that in Texas. We're going to see that in a lot of other states where these Republicans just did what the president wanted them to do, and it's going to come back and haunt him. And now he's on this thing about mail-in voting. These idiotic onslaught of lies about mail-in voting. By the way, we have to remember now, he's done that. He continues to do it. So it's good for him, but bad for everybody else. So either it's that, or he wants to say that it's bad, but he wants to do it so he can cheat. So either it's cheating, or he just wants to do it and nobody else. I think it's a little bit of both here, but you know, if I was the president and my popularity was pretty low, I think I need a convention in Dallas to help me out too. And when you don't want to work with anybody and you just have these constant temper tantrum moments that are just so fifth grade level stupid, when he really needs a good whacking to set him straight, no wonder he's doing so bad. No wonder the Republicans are so desperate. They'll do anything. So yeah, so let's make mail-in voting more difficult, even though there's no evidence, no strong evidence to suggest there's any sort of widespread fraud or nefarious things happening with the mail-in ballot. Let them live in the fantasy world. But president's popularity, let me rephrase that, his unpopularity is going to come back and haunt these Republicans. Folks, I said a few months ago that if things hadn't changed by the end of August, and I'm recording this at the end of August, you're getting this at the end of August, that Republicans are pretty much toast. There's one caveat to that, and that's this convention that's going to be held in about 10 days. That may be a spike, but that may not be the help that they really wanted it to be. It could actually come too early than what they wanted it to. But, we'll see. I mean, I know that's an answer. That's a phrase nobody really wants to hear, but it's also the truth. All right. And so let's round second, and let's head into third. Guess what? We're in another trade war, folks. We're in another trade war with Canada. And Canada has retaliated against the United States because the U.S. and Canada couldn't come to a trade deal, so the president gets all mad and slaps a 50% tariff on all Canadian goods, on select Canadian goods. Let me just say that. On select Canadian goods. Well, Canada goes, hey, we're not going to let you do that, hey, hey. Terrible Canadian accent, by the way. And they slap a 50% tariff on American goods. So now, buying anything has just become more expensive than it ever has. And I'm just banging my head against the desk here, wondering, can we get an adult in the White House, please? Preferably one who doesn't wear a diaper or doesn't throw things on the walls and can actually, handle some criticism without getting his little teeny tiny feelings all hurt. It'd be great if we could have one do that. And then finally, we round third and we head home, and this is a big one here. Rest in peace to the queen of country music, Dolly Parton. There was ever a better celebrity woman in music, it must have been Jolene. As we all know, Jolene doesn't exist. So thank you, Dolly, for your music and your humor. She was hilarious, and on all the shows that she was on, late shows and just a fun interview to watch. You were the best. So that ends the trot around the bases. Now, let's get into the main topic here. This is something that I wrote for the Lubbock Avalanche Journal, and it will appear in tomorrow in its newspaper for Sunday, August 30th. And I get into this mixture. I give a take on the mixture of religion and politics. And so here's where I am with this. When I was younger, I'm not a native Texan. I grew up in central, southwest, rural Indiana. All right. The place is Jasonville, Indiana. All right. I'll be going there for homecoming to celebrate our 25th class reunion. All right. 25 years and being out of high school is really something. And, people like to say, well, I just celebrated my 50th. Well, good for you. Good job. Can I have this little celebration, please? All right. Anyway, but, growing up in there, church played a pretty big part in in my life. Look, I was baptized in the Christian faith in April of 1994. And since my time as a teen, every 2 years I would hear the same thing on the Sunday before Election Day. And that anthem was for the congregation to vote, for one, and for two, vote for the candidate who had the Christian morals. And as I grew older, it became clear to me that phrase, Christian morals, became code speak to vote for Republican candidates. And why? Because they were pro-life on the issue of abortion and stood in favor of traditional marriage in that traditional definition. In other words, the reason that we needed to vote for Republicans was social issues. That was really the big thing. Hearing that, I remember asking my grandfather, who we later called Paps, and who at the time we called Papaw, who would sit next to me in the church pew, and he had very vivid memories of living through the Great Depression. And he had no problem sharing that if I asked or if he felt like I needed to know. And I would ask him, what he would make of all this. And he would tell me that when the preacher gets political, it goes in one ear and out the other. And he would go on to tell me that the preacher's political views had little to do with his salvation. Folks, my grandfather was a wise man. The preacher also would share how God was not just one's own personal God, but the Lord of everyone. This meant regardless of whether we like someone, that particular person whom we do not like, can be a follower just as much as the next guy or gal can. Okay? That no person has a monopoly on Christianity. Neither does a political ideology or party. And so for the longest time, though, there's been a strong political alliance between the conservative movement and Christian evangelicals. You could possibly pinpoint this to Reverend Jerry Falwell's moral majority that started to really take shape in the late 1970s, where this movement saw the Republican Party as a vehicle to drive such religious-based policy through our political institutions. And since 1980, Republican candidates enjoyed more electoral success from evangelical Christians than the Democrats. The problem that exists from this long trend of political support is the assumption that if someone of the Christian faith, if you are of that Christian faith, then you exclusively support Republicans. And to break this down even further, if one quotes the Bible, then he or she is exclusively supporting Republicans. And if anyone differs from that path, she or he is treated as a heretic, or even worse, an apostate. And that brings me to the U.S. Senate race here in Texas. It's made a lot of national news. And so, and in this race, we have differing expressions of the Christian faith that are being judged through partisan lenses. Democratic candidate James Tallarico, folks, he openly discusses his Christian faith. He talks about how he grew up in a church and he openly discusses all of those things, how that actually caused him to get involved in politics. But because his Christian faith is different from the Christian conservative perspective, it's somehow blasphemous. And a recent piece from the Washington Post highlights this. And because the Austin area state lawmaker holds a different viewpoint on the Bible, he is somehow called evil. When, however, the long scandal-ridden past of the Republican nominee for the race, Ken Paxton, is mentioned, that same crowd that wants to ostracize Tallarico is quick to defend Texas's Attorney General by saying something along the lines of, "No one's perfect." You have to go, what? I mean, What? This doesn't make any sense. To any average observer, such a double standard makes you scratch your head and wonder what is going on. But to those in the conservative movement, it makes perfect sense. The reason is transparent. Christianity's use in political campaigns is reserved exclusively for them. And such a mindset begs this question. Who designated the conservative movement as the authority on biblical scripture and its use? Who did that? Well, you know the answer just as well as I do. No one. Folks, I've read my Bible from cover to cover and have yet to find the exact moment when the authorization for exclusive use of its content was granted to the American conservative political ideology. Maybe someone can point me to that scripture. Maybe, I don't know. But those who decry the Democratic nominee for Senate in Texas as evil, among other descriptors, they have a lot more, do so as if they are the authority on Christianity. Folks, like the Constitution, there is not a universal, authoritative method to interpret the Bible among humans. If there was, there'd be no Protestant break with its many denominations of the Christian faith, let alone different versions of the Bible. But due to those very basic aspects, it is absurd to suggest there is only one manner to interpret this sacred text. Consequently, it is equally evil for people of faith to judge someone who uses his faith as the reason for public service as evil. As the campaigns rage on in Texas and across the United States during this fall season, there should be a lot of conversation about character. I mean, in leadership positions, character and integrity matter. Those are some very important characteristics and qualities. What molds those traits is also important. And if we judge others' faith through a partisan perspective, we're not defending Christianity. We're distorting it. You know, I think of my wise grandfather often. And I wonder a lot about him. You know, I wonder what he'd think of the 2016 Cubs, you know. But, you know, I wonder what he would make of this political scene to this very day. I have an idea. But with this particular race, in where I live, and seeing the types of things that people are saying about a candidate, and hearing what people behind the pulpit say, I kind of have an idea as to what he would say, what his response would be. I have no reason to believe he would do what he always did when the preacher became too political. In one ear and out the other. Folks, that's all from me. Thank you so much for listening and watching listening to and watching the Outsider podcast. Look, folks, if you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the show, shoot me an email, the.outsider806@gmail.com. That's the.outsider806@gmail.com. You can see it here on the screen. Look, I'll talk to anybody. I have an open microphone policy here. You don't have to agree with me to be on the show. We'd like to try to keep it as political as possible. But, you know, I'm down with talking to anybody. So, I mean, the more we disagree, I guess maybe the more entertaining it is. I don't know. You know, whatever you would like to watch on that. So, just shoot me an email, the.outsider806@gmail.com. and we can set up a time for you to be on this program. Folks, thank you again so much for listening and watching this podcast. Your attention means a lot to me, and I greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much, and I'll see you again very, very soon.
The preceding analyses and opinions were that of Drew Landry and his alone. They did not necessarily reflect all of his podcast listeners or newsletter readers. Thank you for listening to the Outsider podcast. Be sure to follow The Outsider on X and on Facebook. Also, don't forget to sign up to be a free subscriber to his newsletter on Substack. Just look for The Outsider. We will see you again next time.